Hello, everyone. Today, I want to tell you an incredible story about how English took me to my dream, my passion, and my success. If you have big dreams, to become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, businessman, or anything great, then you need English 100%. There is no doubt about it. English is spoken by 1.5 billion people around the world. It is the language of travel, business, and the internet. If you don't speak English, you might miss big opportunities, like getting a better job, making international friends, or enjoying movies and books in their original language. But don't worry, you can start learning today and become part of this global community. If I can learn English and achieve my dream, you can too. My name is Sophia, and I am from Brazil. I was born in a small town in Brazil. My family was not rich, not poor, just middle class. We had enough to live, but we couldn't afford luxuries. My parents worked very hard every day. My father was a taxi driver and my mother was a school teacher. They always told me, education is the key to success. Since I was a little girl, I had only one dream, to become a doctor. I still remember the moment that changed my life. I was 10 years old. I was in the hospital because my little brother was very sick. He had a very high fever and we were scared. My parents were crying. Then a doctor came. He was calm, confident, and full of kindness. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. I will take care of your son." I watched him work. He checked my brother, gave him medicine, and spoke with so much knowledge. And then, after a few hours, my brother's fever was gone. He was safe. At that moment, I knew. One day, I will become a doctor and save lives. But as I grew up, I realized something terrible. If you want to become a doctor, you need English 100%. All medical books are in English. All medical research is in English. Even in my country, doctors needed English to study, to communicate, to work in hospitals. And my English was terrible. I went to a public school where they taught very little English. I knew basic words like, "Hello, how are you?" But when I saw a full English sentence, I felt lost. I remember in school my English teacher asked me, "Sophia, can you read this sentence?" I looked at the book. The words were dancing. I could not read. I could not understand. I wanted to cry. "I don't know, miss," I whispered. The class laughed. That day I went home and sat alone in my room. I thought, how will I become a doctor if I can't even read a simple sentence in English? I felt hopeless. But then something happened that changed everything. One evening, my father came home tired from work. He sat next to me and said, "Sophia, what is wrong? You are always sad these days." I looked at him and said, "Papa, I want to become a doctor, but my English is bad. Without English, I cannot study medicine." My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "If English is stopping you, then learn English. Go to a place where everyone speaks English." I was shocked. "But Papa, we don't have money for that." He smiled and said, "We don't have much, but we have enough. Your dreams are important." That night, my parents and I sat together and talked about the best place to learn English. Why did we choose Canada? 1. Everyone speaks English. I would have no choice but to speak English every day. 2. Great education system. Canada has the best schools for learning English. 3. Multicultural and friendly people. People in Canada are warm and kind to international students. 4. Affordable compared to other countries. Studying in the USA or the UK was too expensive, but Canada was possible. It was not an easy decision. We were a middle-class family. My parents had some savings, but not much. They made a huge sacrifice. They used almost all their savings to pay for my flight, my English school, and my first few months of living in Canada. Before leaving, my mother held my hand and said, "Sophia, we are giving you everything we have. Promise me, you will not give up." I had tears in my eyes. I hugged her and said, "I promise, Mama." And then, with one suitcase, a little money, and a big dream, I flew to Canada. The moment I landed in Toronto, Canada, I felt like an alien. The weather was freezing. In Brazil, it was always warm, but here, my hands were like ice. The food was strange. I missed my mother's homemade Brazilian rice and beans. The people were nice, but they spoke so fast. And then, the biggest problem, English. At the airport, a man asked me, "Hey, do you need a taxi?" I panicked. I did not understand. I just smiled and said, "Yes." He said, "Where to?" I had no idea what he said. My brain stopped working. Finally, I showed him the address on my phone. That night, in my small rented room, I cried. What am I doing here? I can't understand anything. How will I survive? For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. The next day, I went to my English language school. The teacher smiled and said, "Welcome, everyone. Let's introduce ourselves." When my turn came, I stood up. My hands were shaking. I said, "My name, Sophia. From Brazil." I wanted to say more, but my mind was blank. My words were stuck in my throat. The teacher smiled, but I saw some students laughing. I sat down and felt humiliated. That night, I made a decision. No matter how hard it is, no matter how many mistakes I make, I will learn English. I made a plan. I promised myself, I will do everything possible to become fluent. And that was the beginning of my English learning journey. I still remember my first few weeks in Canada. It was like stepping into a new world, exciting but also terrifying. Everything was different. In my country, I understood everything. Here, I felt like a baby learning how to speak. Before I tell you how I improved my English, let me tell you about the strangest things I noticed in Canada. No school uniforms. In Brazil, students wore uniforms. But in Canada, children wore anything they wanted. Some wore pajamas to school and nobody cared. People don't touch much. In my country, we hug, kiss on the cheek, and stand close. But in Canada, people like personal space. If you hug someone without asking, they feel uncomfortable. Weather changes in seconds. 1 minute, it's sunny. The next, it's raining or even snowing. Self-checkout in stores. In many supermarkets, there was no cashier. People scanned and paid for their own groceries. People say sorry for everything. Even if you step on their foot, they say sorry. I found that so funny. Food portions are huge. I once ordered a small meal at a restaurant, and it was like food for 3 people. But the biggest shock was the English. People spoke so fast and used slang I had never heard before. In school, I learned proper English, but in real life, people said things like, "Want to grab a coffee? Want to get a coffee? I'm down for that." I agree. That's so lit. That's amazing. I felt like I had never studied English in my life. The second day in my English class, I was so nervous. The teacher gave us a simple writing task. I was excited. I can do this, I thought. But when she returned my paper, it was full of red marks. She said, "Sophia, your writing is good, but your sentence structure needs work." You think in Portuguese and translate to English. That's why it sounds strange. I felt frustrated. Speaking was even worse. The teacher asked me a question, and I knew the answer in my head. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I felt like crying. Will I ever speak English fluently? I refused to stay weak in English. I knew that if I didn't improve, my dream of becoming a doctor would die. So, I made a plan. A. The headphone trick, talking to myself in public. One of my biggest problems was speaking. I was too shy and afraid of making mistakes. So, I found a solution. I put on headphones and walked around the city pretending I was on a phone call. But I was actually talking to myself in English. I described everything around me. I am walking on the street. The sky is blue. That woman is wearing a red coat. Now I am entering a cafe. I will order a coffee. This helped me think in English and practice without fear. B. The 3 new words rule every day. I learned 3 new words and used them in a sentence. C. No more subtitles. At first, I watched movies in English with subtitles. But then I realized something. I was reading, not listening. So I turned off subtitles and forced myself to understand. It was hard at first, but soon I started catching common words and phrases. One day, I went to a coffee shop and decided, today, I will talk to someone in English no matter what. I walked to the counter. The barista smiled and said, "Hey, what can I get you today?" My heart was beating fast. "Don't panic, Sophia. You can do this." I took a deep breath and said, "I would like a cappuccino, please." She smiled and asked, "Do you want it with almond milk or regular milk?" I understood her. I quickly said, "Regular milk, please." She gave me my coffee and said, "Here you go, have a great day." And I replied, "You too." It was a small conversation, but I felt like I had won a gold medal. That day, I realized something important. English is not about being perfect. It's about being confident. Learning English was one challenge, but surviving in Canada was another. Canada is expensive. Here's what I spent each month. Rent for a small room, $800. I lived with a roommate to save money. Groceries, $250. I learned to cook at home to save money. Transportation, $120. A bus pass in Toronto. Phone bill, $50. English classes, $500 per month. I worked part-time in a small cafe to pay my bills. It was tough. I woke up at 6 a.m., went to school, worked in the cafe, came home tired, and still studied English at night. I missed my family. I missed home. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered my parents' sacrifice. I could not fail. The biggest turning point was when I stopped translating in my head. At first, my brain always did this. I hear a sentence in English. I translate it into Portuguese in my head. I think of an answer in Portuguese. Then I translate it back into English. This took forever. But after 4 months of daily English exposure, something amazing happened. One day I was in a grocery store. The cashier asked, "Do you need a bag?" And without thinking, I said, "No, I have one." "Thanks." For the first time, my brain didn't translate. I realized I was finally thinking in English. If you are struggling with English, here is my advice. 1. Speak every day, even if you are alone. Use the headphone trick like I did. 2. Stop translating in your head. Start thinking in English. 3. Talk to native speakers, even if it's scary. 4. Surround yourself with English. Change your phone, movies, and music to English. 5. Don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes help you grow. And most importantly, never give up. I still remember the day everything changed for me. The day I realized, wow, I can actually speak English. But before I tell you that story, let me take you deeper into my life in Canada. The struggles, the weirdest things, and how I finally started speaking English like a native. I had been in Canada for 6 months, and my English was improving. I could understand people better. I could order food without feeling scared. I could even talk to my classmates. But I still had one big problem. I was terrified of talking to native speakers. Why? Because they spoke too fast, used too much slang, and I always felt stupid when I didn't understand something. I avoided conversations. If someone asked me something, I would just say, yes, or, haha, yeah, even if I had no idea what they said. But I knew. If I wanted to be fluent, I had to face this fear. So I made a crazy decision. One morning, I walked into my favorite coffee shop. I told myself, Sophia, today you are going to have a real conversation with a native speaker. No running away. I stood in line, nervous. Then, a girl next to me smiled and said, Ugh, this line is so long, right? I froze. This was it. My moment. I took a deep breath and said, Yeah, it's really long. Then she said, I come here every morning, and it's always like this. My brain started panicking. What do I say? But instead of overthinking, I just said, Oh, really? I just moved here, so I don't know. She smiled and said, Oh, cool, where are you from? And just like that, we had a conversation. For the first time, I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't scared. I just talked. After that day, something clicked in my brain. I realized I can actually do this. That moment gave me confidence, and confidence was the missing key. Now that I was confident, I wanted to take my English to the next level. I didn't want to just speak English. I wanted to sound like a native speaker. So I started doing something crazy. The shadowing method. I started copying everything I heard. Whenever I watched a TV show, I paused, repeated the sentence exactly like the actor, and tried to match their accent. Example, I hear the sentence, Oh my God, that's insane. I pause and say it exactly the same way. Oh my God, that's insane. Copying the tone, speed, and emotion. I did this for hours every day. At first, it felt weird. But after 1 month, my pronunciation improved so much. I also started keeping a notebook of my English mistakes. Every time I made a mistake, I wrote it down and corrected it. Example, I agree with you. I agree with you. By reviewing my mistakes every day, I stopped repeating them. This was the hardest step for me, but I forced myself to make Canadian friends because I knew that was the fastest way to improve. Here's what I did. 1. I joined local events. I went to free meetups for international students. 2. I used conversation exchange apps. I found Canadians who wanted to learn my language, so we did a language exchange. 3. I talked to my coworkers. I stopped being shy and started chatting with them more. And guess what? The more I talked to real Canadians, the more natural my English became. Even though my English was improving, life was still hard. I was always tired. Studying English, working part-time, and cooking my own food was exhausting. I missed my family. I couldn't visit home because flights were too expensive. I struggled with money. Even after 6 months, I still felt broke all the time. One day, I had only $5 left in my bank account. I sat in my tiny room and cried. Why is this so hard? Am I making a mistake? Should I just go back home? But then I remembered why I was here. I didn't come all this way just to give up. So I wiped my tears and said, "No, I will make this work." And I did. I want you to imagine something. Imagine waking up every morning in a beautiful apartment, looking at the city skyline, drinking coffee, and thinking, "I made it. I did it. I became the person I always dreamed of. That's my life now." But 5 years ago, I was a broke student, struggling with English, feeling lost in a foreign country. To get into medical school, I had to pass the IELTS exam. And let me tell you, it was terrifying. The reading section was full of long, confusing passages. The speaking section made me feel like I was being judged. The writing section was a nightmare. I studied every single day. I practiced writing essays. I recorded myself speaking. I read complicated medical articles. On the day of the exam, I walked into the room shaking. But then I told myself, "Sophia, you didn't come this far to fail. You know this. You worked for this." So I took a deep breath and did my best. A week later, I got my results. I passed. I held the paper in my hands, crying, "I did it. I actually did it." That was the moment I knew. Nothing could stop me now. With my IELTS score, I finally got accepted into one of the best medical universities in Canada. But guess what? The real struggle was just beginning. Medical textbooks were in advanced English. Professors spoke in complex medical terms. I had to write perfect reports and give presentations. It was 10 times harder than anything I had faced before. But I remembered something. If I can learn English, I can do anything. So I didn't quit. I recorded my lectures and listened to them every night. I made flashcards for difficult medical terms. I joined study groups and practiced explaining things in English. Every single day, I pushed myself. And with lots of hard work, I graduated as Dr. Sophia Williams. I walked across that stage, took my diploma, and looked up at the sky. This is for you, Mom and Dad. I made it. After graduation, I got my first job at a big hospital in Toronto. My first month's salary? $8,000. When I saw my bank account, I couldn't believe it. I remembered the days when I had only $5 left and had to choose between buying food or paying rent. Now, I could buy anything I wanted. But money wasn't the best part. The best part was saving lives. One day, a little girl came into the hospital. She was sick, scared, and crying. I held her hand and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll take care of you." Her mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you, doctor." At that moment, I felt something I had never felt before. I wasn't just an English learner anymore. I wasn't just a student. I was a doctor, and I had earned this. Now listen to me carefully. I know many people say, "Accept yourself as you are." I disagree. You should never accept being weak. You should never accept being average. You must change yourself, not for society, not for your friends, not for your family. Change yourself for you. Because let me tell you something. Nobody is coming to save you. Not your parents, not your teachers, not your boyfriend or girlfriend. Only you can change your life. When I was struggling, I could have made excuses. English is too hard. I don't have enough money. I'm not smart enough. But I didn't. I looked in the mirror and said, "Sophia, stop making excuses. It's time to work." And that's exactly what I did. If you're still here, it means you want more from life. So let me give you the real truth. Learn English like your life depends on it. Because it does. If you want a great career, you need English. Stop being lazy. Get up. Open a book. Watch English videos. Do the work. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Talk to strangers. Make mistakes. Embarrass yourself. That's how you grow. Today, I live in a beautiful apartment in downtown Toronto. I wake up every morning feeling proud of myself. I drive my dream car. I travel to different countries. I help my parents financially. And most importantly, I love my life. But remember, I wasn't born lucky. I created this life by working for it. And you can too. If you're watching this video, you have two choices. 1. Close this video and do nothing. Stay the same. Keep making excuses. Keep dreaming but never acting. 2. Start working on yourself right now. Learn English every day. Improve yourself. Change your life. The choice is yours. If you choose the second option, then subscribe to this channel, like this video, and let's start your journey today. Because trust me, when you become the best version of yourself, it feels like the world is in your hands. Now go, change your